sky. Don't let it all go passing by. You know you only get one life.
I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Carl Jung's words could describe many journeys, but they perfectly capture today's guest. Dr. Pat Mullen's path to becoming a leader in health strategy, well-being, and resilience wasn't a straight line through classrooms or boardrooms. It began with a deeply personal transformation, one that reshaped his mental, emotional, and physical health, and ultimately his purpose. Pat, really happy to have you today. How are you?
I'm great, man. Yeah, likewise. This is really cool. I've been following you for some time, and to finally get on here is awesome. Just really looking forward to this conversation, Charles. Thanks, man.
Yeah, and Pat, I love having guys like you on because it really I have a lot of fun with all the guests I have on, but then I feel like there's certain guests that I think the work that they're doing is just it needs to be heard about. So that's what I'm really happy and interested to have you today. So Pat, I think I'll start here. Your journey into the work you do now, it didn't start in a classroom or a boardroom. It started with your own personal transformation. Could you take us
Yeah,
back and walk us through that?
absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting. I haven't talked about my own personal story publicly in some time, and it's refreshing to kind of come back to this place, and that's kind of what happens. Over time, you get these years under your belt of your own recovery, and you kind of forget a little bit about what it was like. And a comment about that as well is like what got me into this field, into mental health care was absolutely, very personal. And then what's kept me here has evolved and changed too. So it's a pretty cool dynamic, and I'll do my best to speak to that. But from the personal lens, yeah, my exposure to mental health care was as a patient. That was my first foray into psychology. Like you had said, not a classroom or any professional path. And so I was in my first treatment center at 20 years old, and so I was as a young person, a really young person, went through some significant struggle. And it's at 20 is sort of when it reached a peak, and things got in crisis mode from a mental health perspective, from a substance use perspective. And I was, essentially forced into care, not willingly, right? Um, and but it wasn't just this event, right? At 20 years old, where I just, right, it was this process that was going on in my, early adulthood or adolescence, up until then. But the interesting thing about that I talk about is that on paper and externally, outwardly, my high school years and early college years were, successful, right? I went to a really prestigious private high school, and I'm a Delco guy, born and raised in Havertown. I know we've got some Philly-based audience here, so they might know some of those references. But somebody thought I was smart, and I got into this, really prestigious academic high school, and so that looked good, right? Like, looked like my path was strong. Got into a good college, got great grades in high school amidst the issues that were sort of bubbling up. Um, Socially was doing just fine in a lot of ways, right? Like, you know, uh, had a lot of friends, good friends, um, and played sports. And I was obsessed with baseball. Most of my childhood and high school was focused on baseball. I was on varsity as a sophomore. I became captain as a senior. On the baseball team. So outwardly, things looked okay. Uh, but the reality of the situation was much different, right? And so I started using substances at an early age, started with alcohol, quickly progressed to other, substances more frequently, using those substances, the severity of those substances, getting, getting sort of worse and worse. And it wasn't, it's funny to look back. It's funny to look back on, because I have a new lens now, having studied psychology for, a long time, 7 years of grad school of studying human thought and behavior. And so it gives me a different perspective than what I once lived. But the point I'm getting to that with that is that my substance use in high school and in early college, before I hit 20 and everything came crashing down, that was sort of the symptom, right? That was the solution, quite frankly, right? The substance use was what I used to manage my internal world that I just couldn't handle or didn't know how to. Um, and so the root of that, the underlying issues, were much more based in self-esteem and mental health and different, traumas and different things that I experienced, and nothing major, right? There, like I don't have like a major trauma story, which many folks do. Um, but things, happened to me, and there was things that I went through in those early adolescent, years that just fueled this really vicious cycle, right? I had a predisposition, right? I come from a large Irish Catholic family. And so there's components of, I won't get into all the science of this, but I could, it'd be fun. But there's absolutely a genetic predisposition and component to what we deal with on the level of mental health and substance use and addiction and so that runs in the bloodline, of course. And so there was that component. And it I don't have a nice clean, 20 years old, went to care, and then boom, recovery, beautiful story, beautiful ending. There's a messy middle in all that. And I like to talk about that. I like to actually really focus on that messy middle a lot when we talk about these recovery journeys, these transformation journeys, right? Because it's not really ever. I mean, there's maybe exceptions, but this clean before and after story, right? And mine certainly isn't. And so for about 4 years, from about 20 to 24, the struggle didn't stop just because of that treatment care. It had periods of success in there. I moved down to Florida. I spent a couple years building a life of my own down there, kind of getting away. We'll get away from the environment. Pat, we got to get you got away from this people, places, and things. Get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And to an extent, it helped and it worked. But then things happen, lapses happen, and there was some ups and downs, and then and so that was my journey. Was this incremental kind of start and stop, and but those 4 years before I finally kind of stopped using substances and entered my recovery journey that's been sustained since. Was actually the most crucial period of transformation, right? Because that's where I learned the most about myself and how I function and what I need and what my values are and how to lead a life of my choosing. And so a couple things happened at 24 is when I finally kind of surrendered, if you will, and I haven't had a drug or a drink since. That's going on. It'll be 11 years in a couple weeks, September 6th. And so there's that 11-year period I'm very proud of where I haven't used a substance. But my recovery journey in total, I consider much longer than that. I lump it all into this journey that started at 20 when I recognized forcefully, that there was a problem I needed to address. And I made the efforts, and I went to care, I went to treatment, and started that. That whole thing is my recovery, right? That whole journey, right? Not just the wins over the more recent 11 years where I've not used, because my recovery today is so much more than not using something, right? If that's all our recovery is, it's brittle, and it'll fall apart quickly. If it's all based in this, what I'm not doing. And so in my work now as a therapist, psychologist, so much more of the focus is on, well, what are you doing? What do you want to do? What do you care about? What matters to you? How do you want to show up to life today? And what can you do? That's recovery to me, right? Not just the abstinence or the abstaining part. And so there's a lot of more details and sort of insights I could go through. But the one I'll end on, related to what I'm doing now professionally, is going back to school and finding my purpose in becoming a therapist, becoming a psychologist was a major driver of my recovery capital, right? These things that keep us going, these resources that we have internally and externally that fuel a healthy recovery path. For me, this academic route. So I went. So at around 24, when I started to kind of get back on track here, I went back to school and I finished my undergrad because I had left. I withdrew from college earlier, and I was I didn't even think about it. It was this weird thing. I knew I was going to study psychology.
Hmm.
It was like I just, with all the last 4 years, everything I'd been through, what I've seen, myself, and relating to other people, um, I knew that I was good at it. I knew that I could get really good at it, in relating to people and holding space for others, and having it fuel my own journey in an interesting way. Um, and so I went back and I finished my undergrad in psychology and went right into a master's program for mental health counseling, because that path was to, um, uh, be a therapist, a master's level therapist, right? That was my original sort of, vision. And, and then, which you need a master's degree for. So I did that. And then I got there and I was like wrapping up that master's and, was just kind of thinking about what I wanted for the rest of my life and career wise, professionally, and made a decision to keep on going. Right. And there's a lot to that decision that I won't get into, but, rolled right into a doctoral program, a 5-year doctoral program so I have a PsyD, a doctorate of clinical psychology, from a local, Philadelphia college, the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, which is a medical school, with a psychology school built into it. And that's where I first got my love of integrated care and whole person, care, of sort of breaking down the false divide between physical and mental health. And so that's sort of that path there. And so that trajectory of training and working with others, is what's kept me going, on top of, many other, maybe more important things, like, my family and my wife and my kids and my community and these other, components of my life. And so, yes, very personal and entry into the field, and what's kept me going, is 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 really how broken our healthcare system is, right? So having worked in it for over a decade now, um, and seeing how many problems there are with it, like on the ground, right? Behavioral healthcare, as a silo, as this really carved out piece that's sort of underfunded, undervalued, gets sort of sidelined. Is it that doesn't help at all? We have very fragmented, separate types of services. um, Healthcare has a lot of problems, right? Most people agree with that, right? There's not many people that don't agree with the issues that the United States healthcare has. What we don't all agree on is what exactly those problems are and which ones we should focus on. Um, but one of the ones I'm focused on is this fragmentation in between physical and mental health. And So yeah, I feel like I'm rambling. I could
No,
probably ramble for another hour, Charles,
no,
about my story, but, yeah, very personal journey. Yeah.
yeah. No, I appreciate you opening up about that. I think it's
Mhm.
important on these episodes to allow that space for the guests to kind of really go through that in their way. And I no, I always appreciate that a lot. So thanks for that. You touched on a lot there that I would like to, talk about a little bit. And remind me if I forget here, but the whole fragmentation between mental and physical. I definitely want to touch on that. Before we do, though,
Hmm.
I did want to ask you this in regards to your past and your journey and what you're doing now. Do you think that your personal struggles and what you've been through has that made you better professionally at what you do now?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. But and I'll say this. Um, there's a balance there of, and I trained for a long time, and so I got to practice this for a long time. Um, at the same time, we can't allow our own perspective and our own lived experience to be the only one that we come from. Um, and but at the basic level of your question, having lived my own lived experience personally, with family members, right? And so I've lived experience across the board, right? Like, but directly with myself, I've, had my struggles, and still do, right? I'm in a recovery process. This thing's not ending. It's ongoing, which I actually love, because I think it can be very exciting, right? To have an ongoing growth process that doesn't end. There's no finish line. Um, and I have family members, like I mentioned, my bloodline, the large Irish Catholic family. I've seen so much of it. My community, I told you I grew up in Havertown. Um, you know, uh, my first cousin died by suicide. He was 18 years old. Right. My brother-in-law died by overdose 5 years ago. Um, Childhood best friend died by overdose maybe 7 years ago. Countless other friends in my community died by overdose. Um, and I could name them. I could name the ones that are in my heart. And so, yes, my own lived experience of struggle, right? But also being around, so much pain and loss in my community, from this opioid crisis, but different components of that, with mental health. And, so I've been to more funerals than I'd like to admit. And so that lived experience, absolutely makes me more better at what I do, more compassionate, more understanding. And I think the key there is, Charles, is that allows me to understand what we all say in this field, but I think, which is that mental health issues, substance use issues, aren't moral issues, right? They're not. These people aren't, bad people that, um, have a moral failing, or are weak or less than, right? These are people that, found us, like we talk about substance use, even mental health in general, but, like, found a short-term solution for their pain, and
Mm.
that's what worked for them, and that was the tool they had at hand, and that was the solution they found that became a bigger problem than the solution they were looking for. So to be able to really understand that for the human level, right, and to know that the person in front of me is not, uh, sick or ill, or broken or defective, right? It's that most likely something or some things horrible have happened to them, um, or they were in situations that, um, you know, they were using a substance, or they had a coping mechanism in their behavior to avoid pain and discomfort, right? And so to be able to really start to see people as human beings that aren't broken, um, is I think the greatest gift of my own lived experience, both going through it myself and then seeing it in my community, and the people, my friends around me. And so, um,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's no, that's really powerful stuff, Pat. And I can appreciate that. And I liked how you framed that, because obviously you see this probably more than, obviously more than me and a lot of us, but I think this whole stigma that still exists around mental health and things like
Mhm.
that, I think it's getting better. I've seen over the last 4 years I've done this show, I feel like I see it getting better, or at least
Yeah,
I see more people
me
in
too.
the field trying to make it better, which is a
Mhm.
start. But
Yep.
I think what you said there about they're finding a tool to, you know, dull their pain basically. And, it's interesting because I won't get into it now, but for me, and other people that I know, it may not have been, I've seen addiction with drugs, but I think for me personally, it was food. Food was my
Yep.
drug. I was,
Hmm.
100
Hmm.
pounds overweight, right? That's what made me comfortable. I would eat myself away. And, it's funny because if you hear somebody has a drug addiction, they get looked at a little more negatively than the person who may be have a food addiction, right? Or they're
Hmm.
doing that. So,
Hmm.
no, I think really, really kudos to you and what you're doing. So, all right, so let's get into it. I think this topic is really something I really interested in, especially doing this podcast and even what I do professionally. But I think this whole mind body split, the way we're treating patients and just addressing people in general. Let's talk about that a little bit. What do you see from your end? Because I think it's criminal that we're not
Yeah.
treating the
Yeah.
holistic, more of a holistic approach. So what are you
Yeah.
seeing in that area, Pat?
I completely agree, Charles. I think that's a good word for it. Because, um, like, from an ethical perspective, um, just that look, the science has been there for decades, right? And all the stuff I write about or talk about, like, it's not my ideas, right? I'm really, the science of the way in which the mind and body are, you know, interconnected, how they influence each other, how it's really one whole system, right? We've known that for a long time. From the science, we've had neuroscience evolve and show us the connection to the brain and body. Evolutionary psychology has come and showed us similar things, similar insights. Um, the lived experience of people like you and I that know how this is all connected, right? Like going back to my personal story real quick, you know, I was mismanaged, at 20 years old. Like there was not, I did not, I went to a good, a really quality, expensive treatment, because I was privileged enough and got support and different things. Um, and that was a long time ago, but there was no direction or help for my physical my physical well-being, and even more importantly back then, there was still a silo between substance use and mental health,
Mm.
right? So we have like these silos on top of silos because like we have behavioral health separated from medical health and medical science, and then within behavioral health we have these silos between mental health and addiction, and it makes no sense, like scientifically and clinically, that we're not providing a more holistic service. And there's rationale for it. I'll do a quick little history lesson that I just kind of find fascinating. But um, the the first sort of philosopher, Descartes. I mean, this is like Descartes' error. This is going back like 17th century French philosopher, who is brilliant and it just like a bridge to modern philosophy. But what he did was he separated the mind and the body, and he was a scientist, and what that did was really important back then. They had to. Why did they have to? Because medicine and medical science had to evolve um, away from the mind because of religious barriers,
Mm.
because of the religious constraints of the mind and spirit. And so Descartes, they had to, for science's sake, right, break up the body as this separate thing that we can study and examine and use the scientific method for. And here's this medical science, and that's why medical. That's why that field elevated, and science went on the way that it did. But it left the mind behind,
Mm.
right? And so it had a function back then. They kind of had to do it. Um, but we still haven't come back, right? We still haven't fully come back to the unification. And I add another layer to it, which is community or in other words, social drivers of health, social determinants of health, if you will. So thinking about mind, body, and community really as one health system. The science shows that. Um, but our healthcare system does not reflect that. And there's a lot of technical reasons, and I could talk for like another hour about all this stuff. I do write about some of it, but it's a major. I see it as a major issue, and it's something that I'll probably spend the rest of my career trying to resolve, trying to break down the barriers between physical health and mental health. And uh, in my view, that saves us a lot of money, right? It keeps us efficient. Our healthcare system is ballooning out of control. $5 trillion a year in healthcare spend, almost 20% of our GDP on a healthcare system that doesn't have great outcomes, right? So we're spending so much money, and we're seeing that effect across employers, across our own pocketbooks. I mean, it's not sustainable. And there's a lot of, and I'm not, there's a lot of brilliant, passionate people that have been working on these problems for a long time, and they are making progress. And so there's certainly a hope. There's a momentum right now towards change. And I could cite some folks but it's certainly not a solo endeavor, right? This is like a whole movement of people that are changing things. Our healthcare system's broken, and a symptom of that is this fractured behavioral health and medical health system, and then we're not able to fully integrate or care for the whole person. And so that's what I'm building towards. That's where my mind is for the future of healthcare and behavioral health, and trying to advance that. And I've seen, I've seen, organizations and solutions that are doing that, and we're getting good data. We're seeing that integrated primary care, right? So we put behavioral health professionals within a primary care system. We're seeing how effective that can be, and preventing crises, saving costs down the line. Just delivering a better product to your everyday, American that can go to their family doc and also receive behavioral health care, and not just a script for an SSRI. All right. That's one example, and there's many others, but it's about time. It's about time for us to actually act and make this a wholer system. And let's say one last thing, and that is, that requires investment, right? That requires commitment and investment into behavioral health as not as an adjunct siloed specialty, right? Invested in mental health as centered, right? Centered in mental health, right? More and more of us are waking up to how important mental health is to everything, to our health, to our jobs, to our productivity, to everything. And mental health is this is one of my taglines, but it's health is relational, right? So health is not just within us, it's between us, right? And so that component of building community and investing in, look, the healthcare industry doesn't have a monopoly on healing. There's a lot of other places where healing also happens, but clinical care has to be a better bridge into those, right? Into those other informal, natural ways of support, right? Into community. And so there's one thing I love about behavioral health and psychology is that you talk about it long enough, and it's always going to expand into society, culture, and the health of systems much greater and complex than just the individual. And we've had a bit of a hyper focus on the individual when it comes to mental health, right? Individual therapy, right? 15-minute therapy sessions, one-on-one. I do that. I have a practice that does that, right? And it's helpful, and I trained a long time to be good at that. But that can't be it. We have to start thinking about how do we get healthier as communities, how we get healthier in groups. And then it gets, that gets messy, right? It gets into society and culture and politics. But which is for geeks like me also kind of fun to think about, how we help populations get healthier and stay healthier. So, yeah, that's my long-winded rant on integrated health. Yeah.
Nah, you and yeah, we could go on for hours about that, because it's something that's passionate of mine too. I love to talk about it and think about it. I'll say this based on what you just said. I think something important. I think just bringing the awareness to that fracture and how important the mind body connection is. I think it's valuable not just within the healthcare system, but I think
Hmm.
for me, it starts outside with us. And I think when people see that, listen, no offense to you or anybody who practices in psychology, but I think there's a lot of people out there, they look at that as, voodoo, black
Hmm.
magic, right? Like, and it's a stigma and it's wrong. But I think the more we can put out there into the universe that this is needed,
Yep.
and people start to go, you know what? It makes sense the way I feel. When I feel good and up here, my body feels good. So no, Pat, I think
Yeah.
what you're doing is, and the way you talk about it is a big, big deal. And hopefully, to your point, we'll get to, spread it out to communities more. I always listen, it's not perfect in any way, but I always look at Eastern culture when it comes to health and
Yeah.
wellness. And
Yeah.
as far as I'll call their Zen state, their peacefulness, their meditation habits, yoga, the way they're group exercising, it makes sense. And I think it's something to
Absolutely.
see here. So
No
Pat,
doubt.
before
Hmm.
I know you have some stuff to do later today, so I want to be conscious of your time, but I did want to ask you this before we cut off here about not just your practice, but you're also doing some other stuff that I think is really important as far as working with organizations and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Hmm. Hmm. What stuff do you mean in particular? The the
I believe it was your wellness strategies or something. I believe I
got
saw.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's all related, Charles. So it's kind of all related to what we're what we just talked about whole person health, really. And so I'm a practitioner by trade. I spent a long time getting really good at technically, clinically, delivering services, and that's not all I like to do, right? And so I kind of, as we just spoke about, looking at taking a step back and looking at the system, right? Looking at the level of healthcare as a whole, behavioral health, and seeing how many problems there are, and ways to fill gaps and get more effective and efficient in how we deliver um, uh, behavioral health. And you hit on it earlier with the voodoo comment because you're spot on. That the layperson and many folks in community, they still think of psychology as Freudian, on the couch psychoanalysis, right? And my mission with some of the consulting work I do is letting people know that behavioral health is not just psychotherapy at all, right? That's one service, and it's great. It's great for complex cases. It's great for people that can afford it, that have the time to do it, that want to go on a prolonged series of exploration and therapy and psychotherapy, and it's awesome. And I look, that's what I was trained in. I practice acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, which we're now moving towards a process-based type of therapy. Um, and I love that work. I love that complex, deep work. It's needed, right? But it's not the only intervention at a population level that we can provide to people. And population, I mean an employer population, um, or a community population, a like a neighborhood, a community that there are we've evolved over really the last 20 years in psychology where we have brief interventions, right? These might be 30-minute sessions in primary
Mm.
care. We have peer support interventions. So really, really exciting, newer. It's not new in its form. It's newer in how it's formalized and billed for and sort of structured in healthcare, which is the new part. Um, we have that. We have social work. We have digital tools and apps, right, which can give you on-demand education and content. We have AI coming. I'm not going to talk about AI today, but that's a whole. We'll do another podcast on my concerns with chatbot AI. But anyway, um, you know, there's 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 other ways to keep a population healthy, um, that aren't just expensive. long-term one-on-one therapy, right? And so helping organizations design health plans that have preventative measures with behavioral health experts in place to scale support and empathy and bringing in those community pieces we talked about too, um, and uh, and all of that. And then I do things for hire as well. Speaking engagements, HR
Mhm.
trainings, things like that. Which are a lot of fun. I'll end with a little. I'll end with my last plug, which is for the field of psychology in general. Um, the path to become a psychologist is not for the faint of heart. It takes a long time, costs a lot of money. Um, it's a lot of sacrifice, and there's not a huge payoff on the other end. Like, you don't get paid like a primary care physician, right? Like a third of what they get paid if you're in that same health system, right? But you're going through similar amount of school and training and different things, and it's different, but it's just as difficult. Um, but what the field of psychology does give you is flexibility, right? And so I have like four different jobs right now, right? And I can do all sorts of cool things, like consulting. I can have my own practice. I can teach. I can supervise, which I do. I supervise students, which is a lot of fun, who are in training and seeing their first round of live therapy cases, and I get to supervise and train and consult with them. Um, and you can do research, and you can go into academia, and you can go into startup world, which I've done. You can do a lot of different things, and which is awesome. And we really need more talented, passionate people to come into this field. And a lot of that's on us as a field to get better with the proposition and what the incentives are in place to go through and become a psychologist. Um, but workforce development in behavioral health is really important to me, because we are the intervention a lot of times, right? The person, right? The professional, right? We don't have medications and procedures really, or surgeries, like it's the relationship
Mhm.
is the intervention in behavioral health services. And look, it's not always an hour-long therapy relationship, but it's that interaction. And so we need more talent, um, and more folks interested in coming into this field. And I'm really passionate about that, and trying to shepherd, um, thinking about the next generation, Charles, right? Thinking about, Gen Z and what they're going through, and all that they faced, and their unique challenges with, I mean, all of that. And so, yeah, that's my way of plugging this awesome field that I had the privilege to work into. My colleagues and the people that devote their lives to mental health care are the best. We're such a warm, welcoming, collaborative field, and brilliant people doing amazing things, doing a lot of things we talked about today, bridging gaps and advancing this field. And so I'm just excited to be a part of it, and to see what's next for how we help more people, through gosh knows what challenges, are ahead. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, no, and Pat, I think, just having a chance to speak with you here today, I think it's people like you that, you bring that compassion, that you humanize it, because I think people, obviously it's a bit of a stigma. People are afraid. They don't want to open up. And I do think it takes a certain type of individual, and you need an innate ability and skill, not just it's more than being intelligent and smart and good at what you do. You have to be able to have
Mhm,
people want to open up.
mhm,
And I'll say this, our mutual friend who connected us has a saying that he said this to me years ago. Sean McCraws, and shout out to you, but he said, in anything, trust is our currency.
mm,
I remember that to this day, and I use it still. But I think
yeah,
that's a great way
yeah,
to end this here, what you just said. I believe,
yeah.
especially in what you do, trust is the currency. Pat, I think you're doing a great job. Where can people, if they need your services, where can they get a hold of you?
Yeah. And thanks again, Charles. This was awesome. This is a great conversation to start today. It's gonna rev me up into I got a session in about 6 minutes with a patient, and it's gonna help with that. So yeah, website, so drmullen.com, doctor spelled out Doctor Mullen, Mullen.com, has my, list of services, contact information. And so yeah, that's the best place. I'm fairly pretty active on LinkedIn these days, more than sometimes I'd like. I have a newsletter on there. So certainly would love to connect with any like-minded folks on LinkedIn. And yeah, you know, this was awesome, Charles. I
Yeah,
really
thanks.
appreciate it, man. Yeah,
Thanks, Pat. And I'll be sure to have the have your links in the show notes so people can easily click and find them. But Pat, listen,
thank
I
you.
know you're extremely busy. I can't thank you enough for jumping on here. I think this is super, super important subject, and we do need as a society to open up more about it. And I think that starts with people like you, my friend. So thank you.
Thank you, man. It's been my pleasure. This was great.
No, well,
Talk soon, man. Yeah.
definitely. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Please
Yep.
check out Pat at his website and on LinkedIn. And as always, appreciate you tuning in to listen. Take care. Bye.
This has been the Bare Essentials. Thanks for listening. And remember, never hibernate on your goals.